There will also, Rick's going to use a lot of terminology today, define a lot of things, provide a lot of dates and historical information. We will provide links to all of that and background and more information on all of that on the church's website. So if there's a term that you missed or you've just forgotten the definition of a term or something, that will all be available to you. So you can go back and look. So don't feel like you need to be writing things down and taking notes and remembering everything right now, because today has a lot of good background information that might be new to some of you, probably won't be new to a lot of you, but some of you might have never heard these terms before, not used them in this context. What have you. So just know that we're going to be doing everything we can to make sure this information is available to you later. In case any of you are new to this process, I'm Beth Donahoe. I am part of the task force on the LGBTQ Inclusion Task Force. Rick will explain LGBTQ in a moment, but it is a process an educational process that our church is going through to fully understand and come to terms with being an inclusive parish and part of the Reconciled congregational group. It's a Reconciled in Christ is a ministry that's supported by the Synod. It's a Synod ministry, and it is about declaring our support for and inclusion of the LGBTQ community. And this process helps us become a Reconciled in Christ congregation. Rick Pribbernow is helping us, guiding us through this. He is the director and chaplain of Open Door Ministries. This is their little pamphlet. That doesn't help you, but I can get you guys those pamphlets. And he is graciously and patiently helping us walk through this together. And so Rick will be our featured speaker for this forum and the forum in March and another one in April. So I hope you can continue to join us for those. But now I'm going to turn it over to Rick so he can get us started.
So first of all, let me clarify the difference between Open Door and Reconciling Works. Open Door is basically 29 years old. This summer, we will be turning 30. It was originally started as a Synod ministry by Lowell Knutson, which was bishop at that time. And he started it because it was during the AIDS epidemic that he felt that this was necessary for us to be able to have a way of reaching out to the community. Open Door is unusual in the sense that Open Door is a Synod ministry. Most of the ministries across the US that are similar to us are either a collaboration of several congregations or through one particular congregation. So it's different in that sense that we are actually a Synod ministry. Reconciling Works used to be called Lutherans Concerned. And in about 2008, they changed the name from Lutherans Concerned to Reconciling Works. Now, the reason why was because other denominations had much more positive terms. Catholics had dignity, Episcopals had integrity, Presbyterians had more light, Mormons had affirmation, and as Lutherans, we were just concerned. So they figured that there had to be a better term. And since there was already the process of churches becoming reconciling in Christ, then at that point, they just decided to call it Reconciling Works. And it has continued to expand and continue to work. We are an RIC Synod, and in our Synod, we have 51 RIC congregations. We have 3 in process along with you going through the process of becoming RIC. So we have 109 worshiping communities. So we're almost at the halfway point or the tipping point, meaning that most of our churches have gone through the process. The process is that you do a study, you then take church action, you write a welcoming statement, and then you register with the national church. So that is what the process actually entails. And in dealing with that in the Northwest, because we are a little bit more progressive than other parts of the US. They have merged together the welcoming statement and the church action. So in other words, they have encouraged us to have you guys write a welcoming statement, make sure that it has the words sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. And then along with doing that, just vote on the welcoming statement, and then that's your church action. So today is basically Gay 101, and it's more for me to find out what you already know. So it's information that I'm going to be asking you some questions about. So in dealing with that, let's get started. So a bunch of you turned in your birth dates. So with the help of Beth, we found out your oldest member and some of your newest members that are participating in this. So this is what your birth dates look like as far as how we are sort of scattered over a timeline. So I would like you to think about and send to Michelle, what are some changes churches have gone through since you were born? What are some things that are different in the Lutheran Church today since when you first were baptized or made confirmation? So send some responses to her. And Michelle, when you get about 3 to 5, tell me what you have down.
What's trending is the ordination of women.
Ooh,
live streaming.
ooh.
Yes, live streaming of services, and that we've been through several hymnals.
Okay. Anything else you can think of?
A little more acceptance and welcoming of LGBTQ pastors.
Okay.
Also,
Did anybody mention the fact that we have merged several times
Yes.
during this time?
Yes, that's come up too.
That
And-
several of the different synods. And so the two major synods that we have at this point are Missouri Synod and ELCA. There are a couple of other smaller ones, but most of those are scattered around and more dominant in certain portions of the country. So what are some of the differences we have between our Missouri Synod brothers and sisters and us?
Some of the chat comments trending are ordination of women, open communion versus closed communion, stances or statements on the LGBTQ community, and questions. You know, some people don't know exactly the differences. They're guessing maybe more conservative, using older hymnals, less acceptance. That's
Yes.
a perception.
When we had our vote in 2009 to ordain gay clergy that were in committed relationships, there was a break. And so we no longer are working in collaboration with them. They chose to no longer work on call to common mission. So, I mean, there's some differences that we need to be aware of in that situation. So in dealing with this leads us into then looking at how we can look at gay history. So I'm starting way back here in the 1890s. So didn't see anybody born in 1890. So I'm assuming that if I reach back before that period of time, you may see some things on this that you had not been aware of during your lifetime. And in dealing with that, we're looking at some things historically before 1890. So through the 1600s, the 1700s, and into the early 1800s, homosexuality was a sin that could be punished by death. So it was a crime punishable by death. Does anybody know where we get the term faggot?
So that's what you would use to build fires. That's like kindling, right?
Right. And so what would take place is if two men were caught and convicted of sodomy, what would happen is they would be tied to a stake together and then they would be burned alive. The other things that could happen is they could be castrated or dismembered. So in this situation, it was a crime punishable by death for a person to be a homosexual. Now, in 1895, Oscar Wilde and a group of gay men were trying to escape England because they had been arrested and they were trying to make it over to France. And they had hired a boat to go ahead and take them across the channel. And they were caught and put in prison. And Oscar Wilde remained in prison for an extended period of time where he did quite a bit of his writing. And so it went from a crime punishable by death to a crime punishable by imprisonment in that situation. So then that was a crime that no longer you were put to death for, but you were imprisoned for it. And it was still a crime. So by the 1930s and 40s, what took place is it was no longer a crime punishable by death, but it was classed as a mental illness. So in being classed as a mental illness, people who were gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender were put into prison. Probably one of the most famous individuals was Frances Farmer, who was a movie star and was from our area and went down to Hollywood. And her parents had her institutionalized when she came out as a lesbian or as bisexual. And so in dealing with this, it went from a crime punishable by death to a crime punishable by imprisonment to a mental illness. Eventually, what took place is the stigma around homosexuality was such that you could end up losing your jobs, you could end up losing your home, your family, children would be taken away from you. So it was the stigma of being homosexual. And these were being printed in the paper. And this would ruin a person's life. And so in that situation, we went from a crime punishable by death to a crime punishable by imprisonment to a mental illness to social isolation. That word just isn't popping out. So in 1933, when Hitler took over Berlin, before the Nazi Party had their rise in Germany, Hitler went ahead and arrested people who he referred to as dissidents. And this was not just homosexuals, but also the gypsies. So if you were considered a vagrant or if you were considered a homosexual, then you were put into prison. And then when those people were moved from prisons into camps, they would sew on a pink triangle. And the pink triangle indicated that the person was a homosexual. In dealing with this, they would be only given a half portion of rations, not allowed to sleep in the barracks with the other men. They would have to sleep under the barracks and dig holes underneath the lodging. And they were given the worst jobs of cleaning the latrines and also going ahead and burying the dead. So most of the individuals who were gay did not survive the prison camps during the Nazi occupation. In dealing with this, it was a situation where homosexual men were tortured and died, lesbians were experimented on. And so they would basically rape the lesbians and try to convince them that they were really heterosexual. So let me ask somebody, tell me what the word Stonewall refers to. Well, it was a club because you had to be a private member to get in.
Mm-hmm.
It was illegal in New York City in 1969 to sell alcohol to a known homosexual. So the gays had to have their own private clubs. And so you became a member of a private club and that gave you entry. Now, it wasn't difficult to be a member of a club. You just had to pay a cover charge to be able to get in that night. And then they would take your name, and what would take place is the police would raid the bars and they would force the bar owners or the managers or the bartenders to pay them under the table to remain open. And so in dealing with this, they would fairly frequently raid the clubs, and most of the clubs were located in the same area. In dealing with this, the Stonewall Inn in 1969, they were having a memorial service for Judy Garland, who had just passed away. And a bunch of the drag queens and a bunch of the individuals who are trans were going ahead and putting on a show remembering Judy Garland. And in dealing with this, if you can look at the picture real close, you see the little dress in the corner from the Wizard of Oz. And there are also ruby slippers in that same picture. And so it was a situation that they were having a memorial service. There's two stories about this. One is that the people in the back of the bar, because it was a long shotgun type building, didn't know the police had come in the front, or they just didn't care because it was a memorial service. And what happened is the cops, the 3 or 4 of them that were there, started arresting people, and they decided they're not putting up with this anymore. And a riot broke out that lasted for 3 days. And there were a bunch of other clubs around the Stonewall Inn, and they broke out the windows at the Stonewall as well as the windows at the other clubs. And in solidarity, what took place was bars in Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and here in Seattle broke out the windows of their bars too. Probably one of the most famous bars that they broke out the windows in is in San Francisco, and it's called Twin Peaks. And it's a triangle-shaped bar that's right on the corner of Market and Castro. And so at that point, when they rebuilt it, they made it so that it's all plate glass windows. And they determined that never again would it be a situation that you couldn't see who was in the bar, because they used to paint the windows black so that people had anonymity. And in dealing with this, if you were arrested, this is when your name would be published in the paper and your life would be ruined. So Stonewall refers to the Stonewall Rebellion, and it was the start of gay civil rights. In 1970 was the first parade or protest, and that was in San Francisco. And in 71, that's when the flag was made that you see hanging up above, the rainbow flag. Originally, the rainbow flag had 8 colors, but they had a hard time finding the color of pink that they wanted and the color of turquoise, so it eventually became just the primary colors. So what American folk craft was used to educate us around the issue of AIDS? Stephanie typed in the quilt. And the quilt didn't look like this. This is just sort of like a hint to give you. The quilt was started basically in the mid 1980s. The first death of anyone was in 1977, and that was a child of a infected mother who had AIDS. So the first death was a child. By the late 1970s and the 1980s, AIDS was being recognized. And what really made it notable was in the mid 1980s, Rod Hudson came out as having AIDS, and the quilt was eventually shown in the mid 1980s on the mall in Washington, D.C. Each quilt square was supposed to be the size of a coffin and tell the story of the person who had died from HIV or AIDS-related causes. Nobody dies from AIDS. That's an important thing for us to know. What you die from is immune deficiency, and some other thing attacks you. Probably the best movie came out when Tom Hanks went ahead and made the movie around that. It started making us aware of what it is like for a person to live with HIV and AIDS. So let me quiz you again. Tell me the 4 bodily fluids that transmit HIV and AIDS. So you can type those into chat, into Michelle. Tell us the 4 bodily fluids.
Got blood coming up.
Blood,
Semen,
semen.
breast milk.
Oh,
So
very
there's-
good. That's the one people don't usually get, which is why it's so prevalent in third world countries.
We've got saliva.
No, saliva, tears, urine, sweat do not transmit it unless there's blood in it.
Hmm.
If boys have semen, girls have,
Vaginal secretions is coming up. Mucus.
okay? And mucus would only be if it has blood in it. So the 4 are blood, semen, vaginal fluid, and along with that, mother's milk. And here in America, what they do is if a woman is known to be HIV positive or have AIDS, during the 3rd trimester, they boost her medication to really, really high dosages so that she can go ahead and give birth to the child and be able to nurse at least for the first few days so that the child develops an immune system for themselves. So now let's see how knowledgeable you are. If I'm not infected, what medication should I be on? If I'm an individual who has sex with other men, or I'm a woman who is involved with a man who might be HIV positive. Very good, Beth. Beth just typed in PrEP. And what is PrEP?
From what I understand, PrEP is it's a prophylactic medication you can take,
Right.
an oral.
It's a vaccine.
Oh, it's a vaccine? Oh, okay.
Okay, it's a vaccine that reduces your possibility. Because the whole way that we know about HIV and AIDS is you look at 2 things. You look at the viral load and you look at the number of T cells you have. So you're measuring the difference between T cells and viral load. So you want your T cells to be high and your viral load to be low. And this is what PrEP will help to do. It enhances or increases the T cell counts in those situations. I was working with one individual several years ago, and he had 7 T cells, and his viral load was extremely high. He said, my T cells have become so important to me, I've named them. He said, I have Teresa and Theodore and Teddy. So it's a situation where you want high T cells and low viral load in those situations. And we have found that people at this point, especially individuals who have lived for extended period of time with AIDS, are not dying so much from anything related to HIV or AIDS, but rather from the drug toxicity and the number of drugs they have been on for the extended period of time. And there's actually a physical look, just like there used to be. There used to be a look that we referred to as the AIDS look, and you could look at a person and identify it. With drug toxicity now, what takes place is fat collects in the face, over the top of the brows, through the lines or the creases in your mouth. You might develop a hump. You have wasting syndrome where your arms and legs are small, and you have a pooch tummy. And so what they are working really hard on now is getting individuals to have healthy situations as far as if they have been on drugs for extended period of time. This is how Open Door was originally formed. Open Door was originally formed because of the AIDS issue. Lowell Knutson was asked by a family to go ahead and do a memorial service for a young man who had died. And he said to the family, well, why haven't you asked your pastor to do that? And the family said, and this was back in the mid 80s, late 80s. And they said, oh, we haven't been back to church since the pastor told us that our son's death was due to his sinful life and that it was God's punishment for him being gay. And in dealing with that, Lowell, who was presently bishop, told the pastor, you will hold the memorial service, you will host the family, the church will provide a reception, and you will apologize to them and never make a comment like that ever again. And Lowell at the memorial service, because he participated, was caught off guard where the family was sitting on one side of the church to the front and all the friends were at the back of the church. And at that point, that when the friends went ahead and had offered to do the reception, the family refused to come downstairs to the fellowship hall. So he said, we need to do some work around this issue because this is becoming something that we are going to have to face to build bridges between the gay community and the church. So everybody unmute for just a second. I'm going to give you the letter and I want you to say what the letter stands for in a nice loud voice. Now we're going to pretend that we're evangelical and like you would say amen when the pastor said something you agreed with. Nice big voice. L.
Lesbian.
G.
Gay.
B.
Bisexual.
T.
Transgender.
And transgender. I.
It's isn't it intersexual?
Intersexual. The old term was hermaphrodite, but just like we do not call a child mongoloid, the correct term is that they have Down syndrome, or we do not refer to children who are born co-joined as Siamese twins. The correct term is co-joined. The correct term for a person who is born with both characteristics is intersexual. Okay. And it's a person who is either born with both characteristics or a child who does not go through puberty or an individual later in life who shows secondary signs. A woman who grows the full beard, a man who lactates. So intersexual is one of those areas that we are probably less familiar with, but something that we should be more aware of because there is higher percentage. These are the individuals that many times are not seen. And we're finding out more and more individuals who are transgender because now that they can do geno studies, are actually individuals who were probably showing secondary characteristics. So Q,
Queer.
queer
Question.
questioning, and many youth will use that term because it doesn't have to identify any particular grouping. And you're going to see Q plus a lot because many young people are coming up with a whole variety of terms that they are using as far as non-binary or other terms that are not specifically identifying one particular category.
Asexual.
And last of all, hopefully all of you.
Ally.
Yeah, so these are the terms, and this is what Beth was referring to. And there's this little booklet that you can get through Reconciling Works that goes through and explains about this. Now, depending on what part of the country you're in will determine which letters they use and which letters in which order. So as far as writing a welcoming statement, what Reconciling Works recommends is that you just use sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And that then becomes the umbrella under which all the letters sit. So let's talk a little bit about the church. In dealing with this, in 2009, the ELCA went ahead and voted to go ahead and become supportive of ordaining and installing gay clergy who were in committed relationships. You could be gay before this, but you couldn't have a relationship. So this was the whole thing about rostering. Now, it was perfectly all right if a heterosexual man was living with a woman and was serving as a pastor. But if you were gay, you couldn't be living with your boyfriend, or if you were a lesbian, you couldn't be living with your girlfriend. And so this was the whole issue of rostering, and they felt that that was a double standard. And so in doing that, that was the vote. There were churches that chose to leave over this issue. And so some churches went ahead and said, we can no longer be LCA. And so some went to Missouri Synod, some formed their own denomination and group. And the interesting thing was, it was whether or not you were evangelical Lutheran or whether you were American Lutheran. And there was a different constitution or contract that the synods had with them. And in dealing with this, Pastor, you may have to help me to remember which was which. But one of them meant that the synod owned the property. And so in our particular synod, we had a couple of churches that said, well, we'll just leave. And the bishop said to them at that particular time, that will be fine. Please make sure you turn in the keys to your church and your deed when you leave. And so at that point, it ended up several churches choosing not to leave, but to disagree agreeably. And so that provided an opportunity for dialogue and discussion. In dealing with this, I think we only ended up with 3 or 4 churches that actually withdrew over this as an issue. And so for our synod, we did not hit the difficulty that some churches in the Midwest did in that situation. So in dealing with that, this also means that we encourage people to be in committed relationships. And when in 2012, Washington State passed marriage equality, I was suddenly flooded. I ended up doing more weddings that year than you can possibly imagine. It was a situation where we were just cranking them out sometimes 2 or 3 in a weekend, because all of a sudden, all these individuals wanted to get married. And one of the big reasons was many of them had domestic partnerships, but at the end of that year, domestic partnerships were going to be going away. And so they needed to go ahead and legally marry in that situation. And one of the problems that I have now doing weddings is explaining to the person, you have party A and party B on the thing you are signing, on your document. If you make a mistake and sign the wrong part, it is sent back to you and you have to re-sign it and correct it, and there's an additional filing charge. So it's very important when you're doing a wedding, whether it's gay or straight, you see who is listed as party A and party B. I'm having to mail one of those, hopefully the first time I can get down the hill to a mailbox, because we just had a couple that signed in the wrong place. The other thing that's interesting in the state of Washington is that the minister is held accountable if something is not filed. So this is a situation when somebody goes, no, I'll mail it for you. I'll be happy to mail that for you. And I go, oh, no, I'll mail it for you, because there's a fine for the minister if it doesn't get sent. So this brings up some questions that you might have. We have recently changed the logo for Reconciling Works, and it now has the rainbow on one side, the trans flag, as well as also including black and brown. And this is because the flag itself has changed. This is what the new flag looks like. And the reason why they have come up with this new flag is because it also has the gay flag in it, the white, the pink, and the blue is the trans flag. And then they have also added black and brown because of the points of intersection. And so more and more Reconciling Works is working with the points of intersection. And so this is another one of the things that explains, and in the back of the other one, it shows you all the other flags that are listed that people use to be able to identify their sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. So with that, what questions has this brought up for you?
Rick?
Yep.
Oh, could you just explain a little bit for people about what so you used the term earlier about intersexual, and now he's using the term intersectional, like an intersection where things meet. And that's why they've added the black and brown, because people of color, along with most every other facet of our societies, have greater challenges, greater struggles with societal acceptance and everything. And that is doubly true in the LGBTQ community. It just compounds the racism that they experience and the discrimination that they experience and everything else. So including the black and brown is a definitive thing, that is including black and brown people of color. That's what those colors mean in there. And it's helping to support intersectionality, meaning where these things meet and cross and overlap, and that we need to be sensitive to all of those different things. That being a white gay person is a very different experience than being a black gay person.
Being a white gay male.
Yes, a white gay male
has privilege in comparison with being a transgender black woman.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, they have one of the highest murder rates in our country.
Right. So let me give you some examples. For example, on a fairly regular basis, Lifelong goes ahead and does trainings for us in the community that we can go ahead and take that explain the difference in working with different cultures in those situations. For example, they explain to us there are no gay Arabic speaking people that are gay. No gay Arabic speaking people. None. It is considered boy play. It's considered just being immature. So they told us when you're talking to somebody who is Middle Eastern, you have to talk in a different sense than if you were talking to a white gay guy about points of contact. In the Hispanic community, if you are a man who is a top, you are not gay. If you are a bottom, then you're gay because you are taking on the role of being a woman. In the Black community, it's considered excusable for you to be on the down low. So at that point, because Black guys are so virile and so sexual that they are going to go ahead and just have sex, and it doesn't have to do with sexual orientation. In comparison with people who are trans in any of the cultural groupings, with the exception of Native Americans. And the reason why is in the situation working with Native Americans who were not colonized tended to see gender as a much broader concept. In the Northwest, they have 5 genders. In the Southwest, they have 7 genders. So you have hyper male, which is like the warrior. You have dad. You have people who are two-spirit, and that could be trans or gay. You have mom, and then you have the matriarch, hyper female. And so they see it as a broader expanse. In the Southwest, what they do is they have hyper male, warrior, dad, then you have trans, and then you have gay, then you have mom, then you have the matriarch. And in the Southwest, matriarchs become the storytellers, and they are the powerful person in the tribe because they pass the stories on. And people who are bird dash or two-spirit, who fall in that middle area, walk between genders, and they are many times considered to be the shamans of the tribe. So these are cultural, ethnic, color things that we have to be aware of when we're working with an individual in those situations. Is that basically giving some examples or explanation? Other questions?
Rick, could you explain to people, so people, because several people may have seen this, they've seen it if they've received an email from me or several other people, at the bottom of an email signature or something, mine says Beth Donahoe, she, her. Could you explain why people do that and why it's important for people to do that?
It's a way of being respectful to people who are trans and the terms that they choose in that situation. Let me run real quickly and grab something. On the back brochure, they have listed name tags that you can order from Reconciling Works that says he, him, his, she, her, hers, gives option about whatever you choose to do. Zer, z, zer, zers, xe, xem, xy, r, s, they, them, theirs. And what they're making is that this is a choice how a person chooses to present themselves. And Beth, you were right on where it's not only what my name is, but what my pronouns are, how I choose to present, and along with how I choose to present, how I'd like you to refer to me. And one of the big problems is when a person comes out, when people continue to use their old name, or as a trans person would refer to, their dead name, or old pronouns. Now, when we're dealing with a situation, in Asian culture, you just don't tell. You can tell everybody else, you don't tell your family. At that point, it's just, you know, your friends can know, but family is kept in a bubble in that situation. This is pretty much true through most of Europe. Still, in many countries that are Middle Eastern, it is still a crime punishable by death. So we have individuals who have come here for asylum because at that point, their family could go ahead and have them killed for being nonconformist. Russia is another area that's very dangerous to be gay. Have you all heard about the Green Book that used to be for Black people traveling around? There's also a book who are gay if you're going to be traveling to different parts of the world. And here are the rules. This is what you will do. This is how you need to act to be able to be safe. There is no question that you need to ask, you need to be about. I'm more than vulnerable in being able to share my stories with you. One was I was in one church presenting, and this was right about the time that they were voting to go ahead and have gay clergy ordained that were in committed relationships. And I had a woman that asked me, I just want to know, are you a practicing homosexual? And I looked at her and said, have you ever skied before? And she said, yes, when I was younger, I skied. And I said, I'm not Bunny Slope, I'm Black Diamond. I am way past professional in that situation. And being able to use a little bit of humor got us through a hard question. And so if you are talking to somebody, try to be a good listener and try to be able to not hear the question as a put down, but rather as an opportunity for you to be able to share and just be able to be real and be yourself. The other thing is I was in another church and a woman went ahead, and it was an adult forum similar to this, except it was live. And she was sitting next to a woman who was crocheting. And I didn't think the gal that was crocheting or knitting was paying any attention to what I was saying. And towards the end of the presentation, the woman stood up and said, I'll have you know, if our church votes to let homosexuals into the church, I will leave. And the woman who had been crocheting said, and wouldn't that be wonderful? At that point, she said, like we've been studying in the book of Acts, there was discord in the church of Jerusalem. And because of that, there was a split, and the gospel was spread throughout the known world. And if you leave, you will go and be a blessing to another congregation, and somebody else will come and replace you and be a blessing for us. She said, but I know you'll pray about this before you make that decision. And she never even dropped a stitch. She never looked up. And at that point, she got away with saying something I could not have said in that situation. So it's important for us to realize that sometimes we have the opportunity to represent or stand up for somebody else. So those would be my two parting things. So Pastor, do you have any other parting words or comments or questions?
I encourage you to talk about this, and I encourage you, if you have questions, to ask them. There is no question that's too silly or too dumb. We really want this to be,
or too personal.
yeah, or too personal. And so I encourage you, if you have questions, ask them. I jumped on right as we were getting started. So Beth, I don't know if the whole committee was introduced before I got here or not.
The members of the committee, I'm going to call your name and you wave. It's myself, and Pastor and Doug are like our advisors for staff.
Hello.
There he is. Carolyn McKenna. Okay. Celie Lester, are you here, Celie? Did she have to go to work, Steph? Okay. So Celie is our youth representative. Christine Koch, Mark Bateman, Michelle Vossler, Dick Swaysgood. Did I get everybody? Okay. We would all love to hear from you. We want to know how you're thinking about this, how you're feeling about this. Even if you're like completely supportive, we want to hear that too. Our next session is March 7th, another Zoom thing like this until we can all safely meet together. This is how we have to do this. And it's going to be specifically about what the scripture says and doesn't say about homosexuality. So I would really encourage you to tune in for that, because I'm sure that that's a question a lot of people have. And then Rick will also be, the following weeks after that, we'll be doing Bible studies, early morning Bible study, so that you can do deep dives into that, that same topic. So I would encourage you, because I'm sure for a lot of us that's probably our biggest stumbling block to this is, but the Bible says, but this is what the Bible says. And we hope to give you some more information about what the Bible does say and what it doesn't and what it means. So please join us for that in March 7th. Right now, all we're trying to do, Kurt, is just to shepherd you guys through this process and to be your sounding board. We were formed over the summer in the hopes that we would be able to meet again in person, but when Pastor Laura, before Pastor Laura was called, when we were in the discernment process, and everybody was being asked questions and getting polled about what we wanted in the direction of our church and stuff. And this topic kept coming up for people about why aren't we more definitively and openly accepting? We're a lovely church. We're lovely people. We're kind. We love people, but we didn't have an actual statement that said so, that put us on the radar of the Synod, so that when somebody's looking for a new church, they could find this on the website that says this church is a reconciled church. That means I am safe to go there. Our church should be safe for everyone. And so that's what we're hoping to shepherd everybody through that process. So we originally were meeting a lot over Zoom. We were talking a lot about how to do this, and we did a lot of the education that Rick is offering you now. We did all of that before, and we're just trying to get everybody comfortable with this, understanding this. We want to make sure everyone's questions are answered, and then ideally at the end of all this, as Rick said, we will write a statement and we will vote on it as a congregation. This has to be something that is voted on. We have to agree. This isn't a foregone conclusion. This has to be voted on and agreed to by the congregation at a congregational meeting. And it's our hopes that we will take those steps to publicly declare ourselves as a welcome and opening congregation to everyone.
I'd like to add on to what Beth is saying. With in addition that we are looking to make those opposed or questioning or concerned feel safe and welcomed in raising those concerns to someone on the committee, because raising it directly to pastor might be a bit off-putting. Unfortunately, having meetings like this, those who don't attend might be the same people who don't feel comfortable exploring this particular marginalized part of society and welcoming them into the church. So we as a committee will keep working on that to make sure that everyone in the church congregation has a chance to explore this in their hearts, raise questions and concerns.
Thank you, Michelle. That's exactly right. Okay. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I really do. I'm seeing new faces that weren't at the first meeting. So thank you for coming this time. I'm just very, very grateful for all of you. So again, if you have any questions, please reach out.